Hello, everyone. We're excited to have this Future Impact series and delighted to have all of you join us. We've got more than 200 folks signed up, and this is our second Future Impact webinar on the solar century. We're delighted to have four panelists, really all with solar portfolio companies that SJF has invested in over the last 15 years, really, and thrilled to engage with all of you. I'll note that those of us, the panelists and moderators, myself and Jacqueline, will be on the video and audio. We've got so many folks attending that for your engagement, if you could participate with the Q&A button down below. And you'll be able to have a couple of slides to intro, then we'll go to a bigger view. I think if you're all familiar with your Zoom setting, you can change it to seeing a gallery or seeing the speaker at that point. Again, I'm Dave Kirkpatrick, and we can go ahead and advance to the next slide. And want to thank Heather McPherson, Emma Sisman, you see Emma here in terms of helping us organize this, and certainly Jacqueline Goodman, who's going to help with moderating. And we'll introduce our panelists in just a second. But to start, just wanted to give you a little bit of background on the solar investment history of SJF. My first company was called SunShares in the 80s, actually, passive solar company. And so we've always been looking for solar investment opportunities and invested in Grow Solar back in 2006, really a company coming out of Vermont that was rolling up residential, commercial, and distribution solar companies. That became really, we sold the residential division to Solar City in the East for their Eastern expansion, and to EDF Renewables for growing their distributed utility scale business. That led us to Community Energy, and you'll be hearing from Emily Burks at Community Energy, which is really a utility scale solar developer, had done wind development, and then was scaling up in developing large scale utility power plants in many states outside of California, helping to expand the market across the country. From there, as solar module prices dropped, as you can see from the vertical axis on the left here, we were seeing the balance of systems opportunity and the need to drive more innovation there. And that led us to meeting Dan Sugar and Nextracker, and you'll hear more about that story from Kristin Kirsch at Nextracker, but really driving sort of single axis tracking and intelligence to optimize the lower cost of solar power, eventually globally. And Nextracker merged with Flex 10 months after we invested, and it has had an exciting growth trajectory. And then more recently, we had the opportunity to invest in Terabase. You'll hear from Matt Campbell at Terabase, and really Matt and a great team out of SunPower have spun out a set of software and technology that is now working in the Middle East and Far East and around the world, and certainly in the US as well, to continue to drive down the cost of utility scale solar. But returning to our early roots in investing in residential solar and efficiency, had the opportunity to invest with Posigen. So we have Ajay with us here, and Posigen is bringing back in the early days with Grow Solar, we were really selling solar as a bit of a luxury in those years because the cost of solar, as you can see on this graph, was so high. Now solar is cheap enough, especially combined with efficiency, to provide immediate savings. And just very proud of Posigen's work doing that currently in Louisiana, New Jersey, and Connecticut, but soon in many other states for low to moderate income homeowners, and providing them immediate savings every month. And sort of why, advancing to the next slide, why now to talk about this topic? And it's really just because as I'm sure many of you were aware of the IPCC report, we have a big challenge. We've known of the climate challenge for some time. Everyone on this call and all the panelists have known of it for years. I think the rest of the world has become very aware of it. And so we're at all of that work, and these companies had a big role in moving solar deployment in the US to 100 gigawatts, globally much higher. But as you can see, we need to 10x that at least in the next 10 to 14 years to decarbonize the grid. And so we've got a lot of work to do. I think it's roughly 1 million jobs the Solar Energy Industry Association has estimated by that scaling we can do in the next decade, and much more to come. So we've achieved a good bit, and these companies have been trailblazers. There'll be a lot more to do, which means that all of you that are joining us, that are playing a role in investing and growing these companies or looking to join these companies, can learn a lot from these panelists. So with that, let me turn it over to Jacqueline Goodman, my colleague with SJF in our New York office who works on clean energy with me, to introduce the panelists and get the conversation started. Jacqueline.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. So I'm excited to introduce each of our panelists, all of whom have been leading the industry for quite some time. I'll introduce each corresponding to the sequence of SJF's investment, which means that I will start with Emily Burks. So Emily is the Executive Vice President and General Counsel at Community Energy. In her role, Emily leads the project finance team, which is accountable for the company's near-term revenue and manages the overall legal needs of the company. So Emily started with the company back in 2010, and during her tenure, she's overseen the sale and financing of over 93 projects, totaling over 2.1 gigawatts and 350 million in development fee revenue. Prior to joining the company, Emily worked at several law firms in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Colorado, and Maine. She has been hugely instrumental to the growth of Community Energy, and we're very happy to have her here with us today. So Emily, I'll turn it over to you. It would be great if you could just kind of introduce Community Energy in your own words, maybe describing some of the fantastic work that you guys all do, and then talk a little bit more about your own career trajectory to date.
Excellent. Absolutely. Thanks, Jackie. So Community Energy is a leading pure play solar and storage developer. We have, as Jackie has mentioned, closed over 2.7 gigs of renewable projects. 700 megawatts of that is on the wind side, and then 2 gigawatts of that is on the solar side. We are, really known for pioneering and breaking into new markets. And what I mean by that is we've broken into 12 markets, both on the wind and solar side, being the first to get to scale in those different markets. An example would be the 120 megawatt project in Colorado called the Comanche Solar Project. It was the largest project east of the Rockies. We're very proud to have developed that one. Another example would be the 100 megawatt project in Minnesota called the North Star Project. So that is still the largest utility scale project in Minnesota. So we've always been a pioneer breaking into new markets, and I think that we're uniquely situated to see this rise in the need for solar to expand, as Dave just mentioned. Personally, I started out my career in commercial real estate development, with a little bit of overlay on finance and some employment law, and was very grateful when I encountered Eric Blank, one of the founders of Community Energy, and found, much to my delight, that those were transferable skills into the project finance solar space. So I hope that all of you here see that there's a huge opportunity in the market, and that there are many ways that you can transfer existing skills into this great industry.
Great, thanks so much. It's a great intro, Emily. So next up is Kristin Kirsch. Kristin serves as the VP of Global Marketing at Nextracker, where she has driven the company's brand strategy since 2015. Her leadership has helped to launch Nextracker from a US renewable energy player to the #1 solar tracking technology brand worldwide. So she has worked to position both the company and their products in global markets, leading a team of PR, digital, and event marketing professionals. And prior to working at Nextracker, Kristin worked in marketing and energy recovery, great schools, Hispanic Scholarship Fund, Fairtrade USA, and more, with experience across the impact sector. So Kristin, can you just introduce the audience to Nextracker and then tell us a little bit more about how you came into this particular role in this industry, especially after having experience across a variety of other sectors?
Sure, great to be here. Thanks so much. So as you mentioned, Nextracker is the #1 leader in smart solar trackers. We manufacture solar trackers and develop optimization software, of which some of those products are on the North Star project that Emily had mentioned, and among other work that we've done with Community Energy as well. We've been in operation since late 2013. As Dave mentioned, we were acquired by Flex, formerly known as Flextronics. We have 50 gigawatts under fulfillment or operation in 35 countries with 9 global offices. If you're not familiar with what a solar tracker is, in brief, it's kind of like a sunflower. A sunflower faces the sun so it can grow, right? So we are the racking and mounting technology combined with algorithms and optimization software that points the solar row to the east, and it goes 120 degrees to the west to optimize the azimuth solar angle, as it were, to boost energy production on a solar power plant. That's what our business is. In terms of my background and how I got here, I've been telling stories for over 2 decades as a marketing, communications, and branding exec. 10 years in the energy sector, both in oil and gas. I think there's a few of us on this panel. And I joined the bright side 6 years ago, happily so. And my first career was in policy and international development and the health sector. And I guess a fun fact tying in my entire career is as a Peace Corps volunteer several decades ago, I actually worked on solar installer training and installed hundreds of 36 teeny little watt panels, which might be on Dave's greenhouse there in the Dominican Republic. So it's working in the impact sector has been a really important part of my DNA and the throughput in my entire career. So I guess in terms of Nextracker and SJF, we're a proud alum. Some 6-7 years ago, SJF took a very serious risk on our tracker technology before we had any traction in the market. And as a result of that funding, we were able to bring in R&D talent that created several innovations not witnessed in decades on solar tracker architecture. So resulting in us surpassing long entrenched incumbents and succeed to the #1 share globally within 2 years of funding. So thank you, SJF, for launching Nextracker and delivering the world a step change improvement for the backbone technology and utility scale solar.
Great. Great. So next up, or just actually a quick reminder, you are welcome to submit questions into the Q&A. Dave and I will be allocating time for those questions from the audience later in the webinar. So please submit the questions as they occur to you. Next up now is Matt Campbell. So he's the CEO and co-founder of Terabase, one of our more recent investments. And since founding the company in 2019, Matt has led Terabase's operations and overall strategy, driving forward its mission to reduce the cost of utility scale solar to under a penny per kilowatt hour. Prior to Terabase, Matt worked at SunPower for 15 years across project development, product development, manufacturing, M&A, JV formation, and operations. His experience spans more than 200 projects across 20 countries, representing over 10 billion of project investment. Prior to SunPower, Matt worked in the VC, software, and semiconductor industries. So Matt, how did you come to start Terabase? And what was the vision and mission behind the company? And how are you working to realize them today?
Thanks, Jacqueline, and thanks for having me. Yeah, so Terabase got formed 3 years ago as a spin out of SunPower, and as Jacqueline mentioned, spent a career there helping scale up the industry from small 5 megawatt projects to doing projects at the scale of 500 or 700 megawatts. And the company's formed of principles from SunPower and First Solar that kind of were early in this development of the utility scale solar business. A few years ago, both First Solar and SunPower decided to specialize in different areas of the market, and they had previously been vertically integrated, and so that's how the company came into being. What we're focused on at Terabase is really related to the slide that Dave showed earlier. So Dave showed the forecast of the industry growing to 3 gigawatts in the coming decades, or 3 terawatts in the coming decades, which actually we think is conservative. We think the industry is going to grow faster than that. And when we started Terabase, we said, well, certainly the future is terawatts of solar energy. It has to be, because it's the only way you can make enough clean energy to address climate change on the time scale that we need to. And as we looked at the problem, we said, well, to get to the terawatt scale, you got to do a lot more innovation. Even though the industry's made huge progress, the cost of the module has fallen precipitously, but the rest of the stuff hasn't gone down in cost. And in fact, currently we see that costs are going up for raw materials and shipping and labor and that kind of stuff. So we said, well, we need more innovation, and we're going to do it through digitalization of the life cycle of the solar power plant. and also through automation. And we think that there's a confluence of automation and digitalization that'll help make solar even cheaper than it is today. And to give you a sense, sometimes these numbers don't mean much unless you put them in perspective. Our math says that you need to build 100,000 solar power plants the size of Manhattan. So, that's a lot of work to be done. And today, the work to build 100,000 Manhattans is completely manual. So manual processes on the engineering side, on the construction side, on the logistics side, it hasn't been modernized like other industries. So Terabase is on a mission to modernize those processes to help build all those Manhattans.
Great. All right. Well, representing our most recent investment of the group, Aja Ba is the Chief People Officer at Posigen. And in her role, Aja oversees all HR functions, and she is responsible for aligning internal HR with the company's core values, mission, and broader social responsibility. She has spearheaded initiatives to improve professional development, learning and development, and performance management. Prior to joining Posigen, Aja worked at EDF for 20 years, leading HR in multiple functions. So Aja, can you describe your career path in your own words, and then give us an overview, of Posigen, in particular with respect to the company's mission and then achievements to date?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I joined Posigen 2 years ago after 20 years in the energy business. I wanted to change and was really attracted to Posigen's mission of providing solar for all. And what does it mean? Post-Katrina, the city struggled to really provide energy to low to moderate income families. So here, Posigen's unique business model of low-cost rooftop solar panel leases combined with energy efficiency upgrades. They go into these individual houses and figure out, do an energy audit to actually calculate what's the energy consumption and how they can upgrade on some of these household equipment, which improves their health and save their energy. So it makes clean energy available to low moderate income families, which so far it felt like it was solar for the rich. So that's what attracted me to Posigen. And it's been a lot of fun, I will say, growth. We double headcount in less than 2 years. We are currently at a little bit more than 400 employees. Might seem small for you all, but it is, we're doing well, 18,000 customers. Raised Series D back in April with SJF as one of the syndicate of leading private equity investors in the amount of $60 million for the total series. And then we're working right now by end of October to raise 85 million in Series D. So rapid growth, and HR is at the core of it all, making sure that we are fully aligned with our mission for our internal customers, whom are the employees. How do we put in place the right training, the right programs for them, knowing that 65% of our employees come from low to moderate income families.
Great, thank you. It's great to have you all here. So Dave, I know you've been watching the questions. Are there any at this point before we go on to talk about kind of the future of the industry? I'll take a pause.
Sure, we've got one that I'm sure Kristin can touch really quickly, and it was, at what size does a tracker make financial sense versus fixed racking, I guess maybe for the size of the project. And then the secondly was the productivity of tracking on higher versus lower altitude. So a little bit of technical questions, but any quick responses there, Kristin?
Sure. I think that's Bruce. Thanks for your question. I'm gonna pull that up actually, just so I can see what you're saying. Size of a tracker market, make financial sense versus fixed racking? Great question for those of you not familiar with, again, solar trackers versus what was the incumbent technology, which would have been fixed tilt technology, is still active throughout the world. I think the tracker technology in from an innovation standpoint, has come a long way in the last 6-7 years. We're developing in colder climates. Again, I'll mention North Star just to tie it in to others on the panel. Greater latitudes, colder temperatures. We just installed a project in Poland and in Denmark, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan we're working in. So lots of colder temperatures, and so that means innovation in electronics, motor development, and how that works together with a mechanically balanced design. And then in terms of, so from a latitude and longitude standpoint, we're reaching, greater locations, not just your flat desert areas like the Atacama Desert in Chile, for example.
Right.
So, yeah, no, that's part of the constant innovation, right? So solar developers are looking at other land, and it behooves us to look at different ways that we can tackle that territory.
Great. Thanks, Jacqueline. Do you want to go on towards the future-oriented questions then? And we'll...
Yeah, definitely. So basically, now we'll segue to sort of talking about the trajectory of the industry, both establishing, where it is now, and then where it needs to go to ultimately achieve our climate goals. So we're going to start with Emily. You've been on the ground in renewable energy development throughout a period of pretty incredible and unprecedented growth in the industry. Can you talk about how far the development world has come? Mention some of the key issues that you're facing now, and then what you would hope to see or need to see in order for the future development to continue at such a rapid rate.
Absolutely. So the most striking change that I've seen is the scale at which we are developing. When I first started in 2010, the types of projects that we're working on were 2 to 5 megawatts in North Carolina. And that was a big deal to get those projects online, to find EPC, to be able to, finance those. And it quickly went from 2 to 5 megawatts to, we just finished and closed on a 173 megawatt project in TVA with a 20-hour megawatt battery. So, we're just the scale of what we're doing and how many projects we're doing in a year. We used to transact, I don't know, maybe 5 projects a year. Right now we are closing on 500 megawatts a year, and we're projected to do, 3 times that very shortly. So there's just a huge sea change in the size of the projects. I'd also say the offtake is changing. The CNI customers in the time that I've been working at Community have entered the space and really transformed it. So you have, our first market we cracked in Virginia. The first project we built was an 80 megawatt Eastern Shore project where we sold the power to Amazon, and Dominion ended up buying the asset. And it just was this sea change around 2016 where the corporates entered the market and started transforming markets that were otherwise not going to move but for these corporates demanding and their consumers demanding that they green their power supply. So that's a really neat change, and also a huge load demand, right? So that's supporting the scale. Module prices have just continually declined. And along the way, but for this last spring, up until this point, EPC pricing has continually been on decline. So much easier to construct these types of projects. Pricing for that has gone down. Short term, that's changed. I have to say, right now there's a little bit of an EPC imbalance. So that's a near-term headwind that we're facing. Commodity pricing right now is definitely a bit of an obstacle. The assets we have that are struggling the most are those that have contracted revenue. That means they had a signed PPA maybe a year ago, and we're going to construct now, and the pricing that we had put on the table 2 years ago when we bid into those RFPs to win those PPAs is stale, right? And the typical pricing, you'd see an EPC going down, modules going down, you're seeing commodity prices going up, EPCs being in short supply, so they're demanding more money. And we have this forced labor issue out of China creating issues on the module pricing. So there's some short-term headwinds. I think those will correct themselves from most people I'm talking to, probably the beginning of 2023. I think 2022 is going to be a tight year to build. You're seeing a lot of folks going back to their utility off-takers asking for a bit of relief, either on schedule or on pricing, giving these headwinds. But overall, the market is incredibly healthy, and the demand is very, very high. The other thing I'd say that I've seen is just an influx of capital. There are a ton of people entering this market, and I'd be remiss if I didn't go back a little bit to my intro and thank SJF for their initial commitment and support of community energy in 2009, when we had kind of transitioned from our wind business into our solar days. They really took a bet on our team and had forward thinking and where solar would be in the next 3 to 5 years. In addition to their investment that gave our company uplift to really hit its stride in the solar space, they've been an incredible contributor on our board. They're incredibly well connected in the market. They have innovations and connections with these other companies you'll see where there's synergies between all of us. So Kristin's talking about North Star and the trackers and the project that we developed. Matt's innovating on the technology side to increase output and make our projects even more efficient. All of this is possible, and in large part, we really attribute our knowledge of it to Dave Kirkpatrick and his team, and supporting us and being a partner alongside us as we continue to innovate and develop. So those are the things that I've seen change. The things that need to really get us to hit this goal at 3 gigawatts here in a short period of time. We need more people. We need to be able to mobilize and hit these goals, and we have a real opportunity here. The capital is there. We can innovate. We can try and diversify our industry, which I think is very exciting from where I sit. I think people would be surprised at how transferable skills are into this space. At Community Energy, we have accountants, we have engineers, we have marketing teams. You don't necessarily have to have a solar background to be in this space. So if I can impress upon this audience that if you're interested in being in this space, which is incredibly impactful and it's an exciting time, you can probably transfer your skills in some way. So the capital is there. We need the people to ramp up.
Great. That's actually, a great segue to a question for Aja. So Aja, you once said, if a single secret to organizational success existed, it would be this: recruiting, empowering, and retaining top of the line talent. As we ramp up operations across the solar industry, both nationally and even globally, one of the key gating factors, as Emily just mentioned, to its growth is its people. So, how can this industry scale its workforce to effectively meet the demand for that kind of talent? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the opportunities? What are you seeing on the HR side?
Yeah, definitely. There has been challenges that we're facing currently, coupled with COVID, everything happening. It's been really tough to get the right people in the right position. However, there are solutions, and I will divide them in 3 parts. The first one is making a story for solar, branding for solar, making sure that the same way we talk about other industry and the possibilities that are there, that the same exists for solar. We've had a negative impact with some of the solar companies that started, and then quickly there were job losses when the module prices went up during the tariffs. But here, that's no longer the case. Emily just mentioned, the prices are there. It's more attractive than 2018. And here, we need to make a better case for solar, make sure that we communicate more about our industry to attract talent. The second piece is about knowing our workforce and understanding the why they look for a position and what are they looking for. Because in my generation, I was looking for higher compensation. It's no longer the case with this current workforce. They're interested in the 3 P's, the notion of sustainability, profit, planet, people. And having said that, how do you align the company's mission with everything else that we're doing? So we have to make the case of corporate social responsibility in how are we aligned internally and externally in making a case, everything that we do, the difference that we make in our community And if we're not aligned, then this young generation entering the workforce, they don't want to work for us. And the case for CSR is so important because it contributes to our employee value proposition. And it leads me to the next section of training and retention. Once they agree to come on board and work for us, why would they stay? And what is the business case that we need to put in place for these employees to remain with us? So training is key. And all of these national solar training, it teaches you the theory, but how do you move from theory to practice is huge. It's important. And there are several skills. Yes, they are transferable, but we have a responsibility to train our workforce. And because solar is evolving so rapidly, the innovation piece is also key. So 3 areas: branding for solar, know your workforce and understand what you need to tap on to keep and retain your employees, and train your employees.
Great, thank you. So, that's kind of a little bit touching on the people side. Matt, we're going to kind of change over to you a little bit to talk about some of the tech. You've had extensive experience on the front lines of the tech innovation in the industry, and you touched on that a little bit in your intro. But sort of similarly, what can you tell us about the technology that we have today, and what really needs to change in order to achieve the cost goals that you have established at Terabase? What are some of the challenges, maybe supply chain or otherwise, that might become a roadblock as you try to achieve these goals?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the technical progress in solar has been pretty remarkable, but most of it has been in the module and also the balance of systems. So, the modules today, the cost and performance of them was unthinkable. I mean, when I started in the business, they were 12% efficient. Now 21, 22% efficient would be a standard. And the cost is 20 cents instead of $5. So that's been remarkable. Other areas like trackers, folks like Nextracker have helped drive innovation in that part of what we call the balance of system. And then the inverters, the power electronics that convert DC into AC and put it on the grid. So those have all made a lot of progress. But a lot of the other stuff hasn't changed much, actually. The way we engineer and build projects hasn't changed very much in the time I've been in the industry. And it actually relates to the last topic, which is on people, which is to a large extent, people are a bottleneck to scaling the industry and to hitting the climate goals, just because we can't hire and train the people fast enough to meet the demand. And as we were talking, I was just thinking about it. If you look in my bookshelf, there's racks of solar books. None of the solar books talk about utility scale solar. The book actually hasn't been written yet. So we're writing the book as we go. So you don't have the curriculum in universities that might build the direct skills that are needed to grow the industry. It's learning on the job. And so, as participants, we want to develop those skills, and we definitely hire from outside of solar to grow our teams. But then also it's about developing technologies which allows somebody with no solar experience to get into the industry, whether it's helping them engineer a plant, helping them manage a supply chain. So that's where software comes in. It's sort of like giving people superpowers so that they can do more projects more efficiently with better outcomes because they design more optimal plants or they build them more optimally. So that there's this intersection of people and technology. And then one area that we're working on is in the construction. And there's a number of issues going on in construction. Emily talked about the commodity crisis right now. We've got uncertainty around tariffs, which is being very disruptive in the market right now. But also you've got issues with just retaining people, and I just spoke about that as well. But it takes a lot of people to build these projects. And in the case of utility scale solar, a lot of the projects are out in the desert, and it's really hot and it's really remote, away from your family. And a lot of people start, they'll work for a week and then they'll go do something else. They'll go work in an Amazon warehouse or something. So the turnover is a big issue. I spoke with a developer yesterday who said that for 250 positions, they hired 1,000 people. So they had a 4x turnover just over the course of 1 year of a project. So I think that's a big issue for the industry. Coming back to the technology, that's where we're looking at, forms of automation that make the job safer, that make it easier, that doesn't require as much exertion. So you're not just relying on lifting thousands of pounds of panels every day. You get assistance from technology. So I think technology is a key driver along with the people development, for the scale up.
Great. And, we just got a question from the audience that actually kind of follows up on this, Matt. So maybe we'll just ask you a quick follow-up to that. This comes from Carol Rosenfeld. So, it says the tech Terabase is developing seems specifically designed to reduce the number of people needed to build a solar installation. How do you all reconcile this drive to cut costs and therefore labor hours with Audrey's points about gaining the trust of potential workers and offering them training and meaningful work? Maybe it comes down to this question around conditions that you're talking about. So any kind of response there, Matt?
Yeah, that's a really good and logical question. And we've got some experience on this topic, which is when I was at SunPower, we deployed robots to clean the panels. Before that, the panels were cleaned manually. And but you still needed people. You needed people to run the robots, people to fix the robots, people to engineer the robots. And because we used robots, we were able to clean 10 times more often than we could do it manually, because it was so expensive to do it manually. So in fact, if you looked at the number of people we employed in the cleaning operation, it increased through the robots, it didn't decrease. So there's some counterintuitive effects like that. And in the case of building a solar power plant or engineering it, I would say that if you employ some automation, it allows you to build more projects and build them faster and build them with higher quality and safer and in a better working environment. So it's not gonna eliminate any jobs. It's going to enable the industry to grow faster. If the industry grows faster, you have more jobs. So it's a complicated topic, and we see it in other industries where automation is introduced. It doesn't, it leads to more innovation and more job creation and growth.
Great, thanks. All right, so Kristin, I'm going to pivot to you. One of the key pieces to positioning the Nextracker brand well globally is being able to respond well to news and to policy. And as you have been monitoring the Biden infrastructure plan and the implications for the industry, what have you noticed? How will this legislation help us to achieve our goals for solar, and where does it fall short?
Well, we're at a pretty critical moment right now, even in today's legislation and different news items that have come out with OSF's bill on the Solar Energy Manufacturing for America Act. I don't want to get too wonky with folks, but I can kind of just give some highlights. Nextracker is really involved on the policy side and advocacy. We work very closely with SEIA, the Solar Energy Industries Association. For those of you on the call that are not aware, we work very closely with the House and Senate to support inclusion of an extension to that solar ITC. For 10 years now with direct pay, and we're excited about the support we've received that will keep our industry growing. And we're working with Congress and the administration on ensuring that solar jobs continue to be well paid. Today, solar jobs are on par or better paid than similar energy jobs in other industries. The industry employed, I guess if you're looking at 2020, 2021 statistics, kind of solar job census work that we've been doing, we're looking at around 231,000 Americans in employing solar. But if we're to reach the goals that are set forth by this administration, we need to meet a 1 million solar jobs target. How are we going to do that? How are we going to do that equitably? How are we going to bring in more diversity into the solar workforce? And so we have a lot to do. I think looking at we have to look at the whole entire issue holistically. From a trade policy standpoint, we need really sound policies in place like the ITC and workforce development programs. A decade of solar tariffs have not grown in our US supply chain. And if we want to onshore solar manufacturing, then we really need a production tax credit specific to solar manufacturing that supports the entire solar value chain, not just polysilicon cells and modules. We're looking at inverters, trackers, wiring, BOS systems, balance of system, and so forth. So, just today I'd mentioned earlier on in the webinar that, we supported Senator Swalwell's bill, the Solar Energy Manufacturing for America Act, which is also known as SEMA. Some of you may have heard of that. And this provides basically tax credits for American manufacturers at every stage of the solar manufacturing supply chain. And we have headwinds. Some of those have already been mentioned, and some of those headwinds are the Circumvention Act. It's a petition that's been implemented, and the industry could lose actually 45,000 solar workers by 2023. Again, so many other facts that I could mention, but we have to be working together as an industry and in sync with each other and not divided.
I think one point there, Kristin, you mentioned CI, and it's just, I know all of these companies have been active in working in policy at the state and federal level and supporting the trade associations and speaking out to Congress to support the solar industry. It's so important. But Jacqueline, I'll turn it back to you.
So, I mean, I just one other plug, I guess, to SIA. SIA has, out of the entire solar energy industry, it's incumbent on us to be members. Again, a little plug there, but they only have 10% of the entire solar energy industry's companies that are actual members. So in order for us to get this bill passed and these things moving forward, we need to be participating, and we need to be loud voices.
Agreed.
Okay, great. Dave, did you want to check in with some questions from the audience, or we can keep going?
Well, we can, we've had a number of questions around storage for sure, related questions. And so I'm not sure who's anyone feeling inspired, Emily or Matt or Kristin, to talk about some of those storage items here. There, I'm sure you can see the questions. There's both combinations with hydro and thermal based storage, the role of co-location of energy storage with solar. I know with all of our companies, we're seeing storage, and then issues of dealing with intermittency. So, I know all of these companies to some extent are dealing with energy storage. Anyone want to raise a hand and say a bit more?
Sure.
I can start by saying, but I think probably Matt and Emily would be best poised, as if I can just put them on the spot. But from an Nextracker standpoint, we certainly have R&D efforts. We've worked in storage. But we don't see any utility scale solar bids that come forward without a storage component. So I guess I would lob it over to Emily to maybe confirm or kind of talk to the industry trends. Scaling is happening, costs are coming down, and that's what we're looking for, right?
Yes, absolutely. And the cost is the big piece on the battery side, the battery component, right? So in certain markets like the TVA project I mentioned, where we just closed this 173 megawatts, I think a 20 megawatt hour battery on that project, and it was incredibly successful and cost effective in that market. So where we're at right now is, as the cost of batteries come down, it's going to make more sense to couple it with our solar projects, but it will determine in large part, really, we're finding some utilities aren't there yet. So we'll have a interconnection filing, which is our ability to take our asset and connect it to the electrical grid and put electrons on the grid. You have to be in a queue and hold your position in that queue for the utility to evaluate whether or not your project can go on that line if there's capacity. And so what we're seeing is we'll file these interconnection applications to get in the queue, and we'll reserve the battery component as well. And they'll study it that way. But we're finding when we get to the RFPs and the short list that some utilities are saying, we're not really seeing value in the battery yet. We're not quite sure how we want to value it. Is it an ancillary service? Is it something that we want to figure out how to manage ourselves, or are we a little bit behind? So it's interesting, right? It's the chicken and the egg. Is the utility wanting it? We're trying to create optionality with all of our projects and filing for a battery component. But ultimately, it's the off-taker who determines whether or not the battery has value. So I think the projection would be they will say yes in the coming years, and that pricing will get better and better. But I think it's kind of market specific at the moment. I don't know, Matt, if you've had a different experience, but that's what I've seen so far in my company.
No, I think it's consistent with that. Yeah, we see more and more projects including it. I think the business cases are still being worked out. Sometimes I feel like, some of it's sort of a trialing of the technology. You put a little storage on a big solar project. And then we see different trends globally. I mean, there's a trend towards hybridization, wind, solar, hydro with battery in different combinations. Then, of course, you've got hydrogen, which we're really excited about in the future, as well as some disruptive battery technologies that are still in R&D. So we're hopeful that some of those work out. But yeah, the lithium-ion based systems and the projects are getting huge. I worry about the supply side. Is there going to be enough supply to support cost reductions in batteries? Because the EV growth the next 5 years is going to be crazy. I mean, I think we're just at the beginning of a huge ramp, and I just don't see there being enough batteries the next few years.
I wanted, Aj, I was going to wrap you in with storage a little bit here too, because I think with the Sunruns and Sunnovas of the world, they're selling more to middle and upper income. They are seeing attach rates of storage with residential solar, especially in markets like California or hurricane hit, because folks want to be able to use their solar when the grid's down. And I know when Ida hit Louisiana, a lot of the Posigen customers, I'll say we, because we're a shareholder, so the roofs was protected to some extent by the solar modules, but when the grid was down in those neighborhoods, I know Posigen did a lot on some community solar installations, but those customers weren't able to use their power when the grid was down, right? And can you talk about how any kind of future plans on integrating storage with the offering at Posigen?
Yeah, the customers definitely didn't have access to power when the grid was down, even though they have the solar panels. So there's definitely, I know even at Posigen, different talks on how do we move forward with this question of storage. There are not a solution per se on how we need to move with this issue, but it is definitely a concern of ours. Right. And we've helped out a lot different customers, but it had to be off-grid.
Right. I'm just scanning. We've got more questions coming in. Jacqueline, did we cover the core ones that we had? We can go to some of these others, but
yeah, we did. We have plenty of time for Q&A now, so please keep submitting them. They've been great so far. One thing I would be curious to hear, how do you all, I think about land use conflicts over utility scale solar, NIMBYism, environmental opposition, et cetera, kind of competing interests around land use change and then, project development. This is probably, better for the utility scale, but would just love to hear about kind of evolution in that regard. That question also comes from the audience.
Emily, you want to take that one first? I can add to.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, unfortunately, the answer is it depends on the market you're in, right? So, for example, the first really large-scale utility scale project we had was in Pennsylvania called the Keystone Solar Project, and it was on somewhat prime agricultural land, and we had to manage talking to the community about a portion of their land being taken out of production for 20, 30 years. And the fact that the land, so it's usually an argument between landowner rights. I own the land, it's been in my family forever. I have a generation of kids that don't want to farm, but we don't want to sell. So what can we do, right? And so you have the argument of, I own it, I should have the right to do what I want with it, as long as it's a permitted use within our zoning, right? And then you have the flip side of folks who are very worried that maybe farming might die in that community because people are seeing it's easier to have someone of an annuity under a solar lease for 20 years. So it's a hard conversation, and typically comes down, I'll be honest, to the local permitting authority and their view and the community's view on how they want to grow. I will say that oftentimes solar brings in tax dollars with very little strain on the actual community. So, we give, the tax incentives that we give go to the schools and the hospitals, but with no drain on the school and the hospital. No one's going to be a long-term resident there. So there's a benefit to the solar facility being there. We've also worked locally to have, to try and position it as a very much a positive. So we'll do job training locally, which is a little bit different from land use, but what are we as a solar facility bringing to the community? We're going to train these folks. We also set up, on our Eastern Shore project, we had a solar walk, which was a requirement of the permitting authority. That would be an educational walk for the schools locally to take their kids on a field trip and be able to walk through the solar facility and explain how it works. And so it was, again, a bit of a long-term partnership in trying to invest in that community. So, I also say there's a lot of farmland that's not productive. And so in areas where we know that that's a really tricky conversation to be had, we'll target maybe less productive land. And that's how we work with folks to say this land isn't particularly productive anyway. So the family would like to use this as an opportunity to farm solar, And the last thing I would say is we are creating some innovation on the land front. We have, Dave can tell you too, we have some sheep that are, grazing underneath the solar panels on a couple of our projects. We are getting really good at potentially farming underneath some of the panels. That's an idea and an innovation that we're working on. And we're also working locally to make sure that we have local flora and fauna that would actually enhance the soil so that when the solar facility's life is done, the land will be better off than it was otherwise. So those are the things that we do to try and, win over the trust of the community, that it's a good use of the land and it's a good thing for the community.
I'd like to add on to that, looking at the actual design of the plant itself. There are so many things, and we have just scratched the surface. As Emily mentioned, agrivoltaics. You can also design with unlinked rows on your large-scale solar farm where you're treading lightly. And also I think there's a misconception around utility scale solar that, and sorry, Aja, I'm going to bring it to you. We're talking about the ground mount stuff. Is there's a misconception, that we're not doing environmental impact assessments. That's what permitting is. And, there's a tremendous amount of work that's done on the permitting side with origination. So, there's the desert tortoise, for example. There's so many areas that it's more just education. I think it comes down to that. But I did also want to mention that on putting more solar in the federal lands, and this could be as well as for rooftop, as well as ground mount. There's retraining of, let's say, we have a project called Cayenta in Arizona that trained hundreds and hundreds of Navajo on the reservation. So there's a lot of partnerships that can happen that we need to bring light of day, and I think a lot of folks may not know about them. So we need to be talking about that. And then retraining laid off coal workers, for example, which goes hand in hand with land use and land that can't be used, and retraining, a tremendous amount of folks in the fossil fuel industry and bringing them over again to the bright side. So maybe Ajay, you have something to say on retraining, and I don't know if you guys have worked with any folks on the fossil fuel side.
Not on the fossil fuel side, but what we've done with retraining is we have a special program with the solar vets and the former veterans, how we can train them. We have a 12-week program so they can work on some of these solar positions. And it's just been the notion of retaining that knowledge, just even within our own staff, someone with more experience in solar, in training new entry-level employees, in just making sure that we retain that knowledge, not only in our industry, but really maintaining the skills needed, the core skills needed in order to get some of these jobs. But so far, it's been with the SolarVex program. We also trying to partner with some of these community colleges where they have solar programs, so we can attract more young graduates into the solar industry.
Joe, we had one question come across about the COVID pandemic impacts with respect to the labor shortage, and I know that the sales force had to go digital for a little while with Positive.
Yeah.
Just any comments briefly on that? Or?
Yes, and they were able to transition well into selling online via Zoom. I think Posigen did very well during the COVID challenges. We didn't have to lay off employees. We had an increased number of staff, but what it taught us was how to remain agile in the way we work, in the way we perform, whether it's online or being more creative and processing more efficiently some of these documents processing. Also, on the COVID front, we had several measures that we've put in place more recently, testing and making it mandatory for some of our employees, and educating also our staff on getting the vaccine and how to work in all safety was very important for us.
I see that we're almost at the hour. We've got more questions flooding in, which is great. We won't have time to answer them all. I had an idea as a recap kind of on the fly here, but given we've still got a whole bunch of participants on that have a lot of interest, is sort of what resources, what publications, what associations, kind of where would you send folks? Maybe we can go around the horn, and just if they wanted to learn more, catch up on the solar industry, I'm aware of some that I follow, but I'm curious if folks could kind of do a wrap up with thoughts on where, if you were an entrepreneur or a student or someone wanting to get in the industry, whether the top 2 or 3 or 4 places you'd go. Emily, I'll start. We'll go back historically. So Emily.
Sure. I would start with a book called Edison to Enron. That's a really good book if you're looking for a basic kind of intro to what we're talking about in the energy markets. And then from a more current reference, I definitely listen to the Energy Gang. It's a podcast that I love. And I think Norton Rose, it's a law firm, but they have Keith Martin, who leads a podcast as well, primarily on the tax front, but which drives a lot of what we're doing. But he's incredible. And those are just weekly. I think Norton Rose is a little less than weekly, but the Energy Gang and Norton Rose would be podcasts I would listen to.
Okay, maybe I'll post a question in, well, I'm trying to get these in the chat below so people can see them. Maybe as we mentioned these, I don't know if Emily can figure out how to get them down in the answers below, the links to some of these. But then we'll go to, let's go to Kristin.
Sure, I like the round robin approach. So I would go to Canary Media, strong advocate. Those are some of the alum from the veterans, I should say, of GTM, Bloomberg New Energy Finance, for those MBAers on the call. What It Takes podcast, also a huge fan of podcasts. Great way to learn about the energy industry and renewables. My good friend Emily Kirsch runs that. And Renewables Forward, we are a founding member. It is a collective of companies in the renewable energy industry to bring more diversity into our workplaces. And then for training, Solar Energy International. They have 30 years of experience. They've trained over some 70,000, 80,000 workers in the space, both in the construction area as well as the boardroom.
Okay.
Those are my quick hits.
All right. Wow, it's getting harder because there's lots being covered. So Matt, what do you have to add?
All of those, plus PV Magazine, I like, which has got a lot of well-written pieces about the technology and market. And then hopefully soon trade shows. Historically, it's a great way to learn. It's a great way to network. There's classes. Unfortunately, this year, Solar Power International in New Orleans was canceled. Next week is actually the first major solar trade show since COVID. It'll be in Munich if you happen to be in Germany. But it's good to start to get folks back together in person. And then hopefully next year as things open up, we'll see some shows in the United States. And so if you're looking to get in the industry, I think those are great resources.
I'll echo that. I remember doing diligence on some of the companies here, including Nextracker, and going to SPI, Solar Power International, and talking to competitors, suppliers, customers, and decide, and then having dinner with Dan Sugar. And basically that was like, okay, now we've got it. But yes, I definitely agree. Ajay, what would you add?
Definitely SPI. Too bad it was canceled this year due to COVID, but hopefully next year. One book that I really liked, it's Let It Shine. It's really about the solar story, but more, the fear about the solar story, but it's really enlightening if you want to learn more about solar.
Great. Well, good. Well, I think we should probably put a wrap on it. Well, that went quick. That was fun. I really want to thank Emily and Matt and Kristin and Aja for helping, and Emma and Heather and Jacqueline for helping coordinate all this. This has been fun. We're getting questions about the different books and stuff. So maybe you guys, while we're still on, try to type in the answer there to the questions, you see it down below, some of your links. So I had Let It Shine, I had Edison to Enron, Renewables Forward, Solar Energy International, PV Magazine, Canary Media. What I missed? I think those were some of them. Gosh, that was a good list. And anyway, this particular, if you have colleagues, folks who are listening, do you think this was helpful? You can, we'll put up on SJF's website and our social media where to access the rebroadcast of this. So I think that's it. Jacqueline, Emma, did I miss anything before we wrap up? Let people go back to their day jobs.
Well, one last question from the audience, which is, Dave, we're so impressed with your success in helping lead the creation of these really exciting companies. Can you comment on your view of the future? We'll kick it back to you, Dave.
Oh, no, I was avoiding that. No, I think it's just, part of the reason we're doing this is hopefully to inspire some of the participants. But I think with all of these companies, I think we had an inkling of where the industry is going. And then I sat down with Matt or Brent or whomever, and it catalyzed. So I think it's really finding the next great solar entrepreneurs is a part of our purpose in doing this as well. So we have a lot of opportunity for scale, and it's going to have great employment and climate impact. So let's go at it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Dave, the one other quick mention I'll make is that our next Future Impact webinar coming up in a couple months will be focused on healthcare. So we're moving through SJF's portfolio in different themes and sectors that we're active in. So be on the lookout for some information on our next one coming soon. But thanks everyone for joining.
All right. Thanks, y'all. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.